I thought I was just visiting my friend, until his mom and her sister whispered, "You're ours tonight." I hadn't expected tonight to feel different. It started like any other evening I spent at Alex's house. A casual visit, maybe a few hours of laughter and video games. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately. The house seemed warmer somehow, the glow from the living room spilling onto the front lawn like an invitation. Even from the curb, the air felt different, a faint, sweet scent of vanilla and something floral, soft and comforting, lingering in the evening breeze. When I stepped inside, it was impossible not to notice them. Alex's mom, Claire, greeted me first. She always had that quiet confidence, a way of standing that made it seem like she had the whole room at her command without demanding it. Tonight, though, there was a softness in her eyes, something unspoken, as if she was waiting to see how I would react. Her sister, Lila, who had a mischievous streak, stood just behind her, giving me a smile that lingered a second too long, playful but knowing. "Hey, come in," Claire said, her voice warm, carrying that subtle lilt that always made it feel like she was speaking just to me, even in a crowded room. When she brushed past me to hang my jacket, her hand grazed my arm for the briefest instant. It was nothing overt, but my chest had tightened in a way I wasn't expecting. Lila stepped closer, tilting her head slightly, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me a glass of water. A small, intimate contact, almost accidental, but it left a trace of warmth I couldn't ignore. The living room was cozy, the kind of space that invited you to linger. Soft lighting cast gentle shadows over plush furniture, and the faint scent of freshly baked cookies lingered in the air. I could hear the low hum of music coming from the kitchen speakers, something instrumental and calming. It was familiar, yet tonight, it seemed to set the room ablaze with a subtle, quiet energy. I found myself noticing little things I hadn't before. The way Claire's hair caught the light, the gentle curve of her smile when she looked at me, the warmth of Lila's presence whenever she leaned closer to pour a drink or adjust a chair. Even Alex's dog seemed to sense it, brushing against my leg, nudging my hand with a soft, affectionate insistence, as if encouraging me to stay in the moment. I shifted uncomfortably, aware that my pulse was slightly elevated, but also strangely content, as if the house itself had wrapped me in a soft embrace. There was a subtle current under it all, a quiet tension I couldn't place at first. Small gestures, lingering glances, the way they moved through the room together and yet always ended up near me, drawing me into the orbit of their warmth. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things, but when Claire's hand briefly rested on my shoulder and Lila's laughter danced close enough to brush my ear, I realized tonight would not be like any other night. Something unspoken was waiting, something I wasn't yet ready to name, and I felt, with a quiet thrill, that I was about to step into it. The evening settled into a comfortable rhythm, though I could feel an unfamiliar tension threading through it, subtle but undeniable. Claire and Lila had invited me to help them in the kitchen, ostensibly to chop vegetables and stir sauces, but I realized quickly that this was more than casual hospitality. Their presence drew me in like gravity. Every movement, every laugh, felt deliberate, almost choreographed around me. Claire stood beside me, her fingers brushing against mine as she handed me a knife. The contact was fleeting, yet I felt a spark run through my arm, a warm, grounding pulse that made me acutely aware of her proximity. I glanced at her face, catching her eyes just as she looked away with a soft smile that lingered in my mind long after she turned back to the counter. Lila was across from us, laughing at a shared joke with Claire, and her gaze found me more than once. Each glance held a teasing warmth, a subtle invitation I couldn't ignore. The kitchen smelled of fresh herbs and simmering tomato sauce, a rich, comforting aroma that wrapped around us like a quiet embrace. My hands felt the cool, smooth surface of the countertop as I leaned over to reach for a cutting board. Every so often, our shoulders brushed accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, and I found myself catching my breath at the simple intimacy of it. It was strange, the way ordinary actions could feel charged when I was in their orbit. As we worked, our conversation flowed easily, full of playful teasing and quiet laughter. Lila nudged my shoulder lightly as I mispronounced an ingredient, and Claire leaned just a little closer than necessary to point out the correct way to chop garlic. Their movements were subtle, natural, yet the effect on me was immediate. I felt a delicious tension in my chest, an almost magnetic pull that made me more aware of the warmth radiating from them. I tried to focus on the task at hand, chopping vegetables and stirring sauce, but my mind kept drifting to the small, intimate moments. The way Claire's hair brushed against my hand when she reached over, the soft tilt of Lila's head as she watched me, the shared smiles that seemed to linger a beat too long. I could feel the quiet rhythm of their presence syncing with mine, a gentle cadence that made the kitchen feel both alive and intimate in a way I hadn't anticipated. Even the mundane became charged. Passing a bowl between us, our fingers brushed, and I felt a brief, grounding shock at the contact. Warmth, softness, a reminder of how present they were. I caught myself imagining what it would be like if these moments continued, stretching beyond casual interaction into something more, something unspoken yet unmistakably tangible. By the time we finished cooking, I realized I wasn't just physically close to them. I was emotionally entwined in the quiet intimacy of the evening. Their laughter, their gestures, even the way they glanced at me when they thought I wasn't looking, had drawn me in, leaving me curious, unsettled, and undeniably aware of the subtle tension that now hummed between us. Tonight, I understood, was going to be unlike any other night I had spent here. The evening had settled into a gentle rhythm, and yet I felt a quiet tension building, a sort of electric anticipation that made every small movement feel amplified. After dinner, Claire and Lila excused themselves from the living room for a moment, leaving me near the kitchen counter with the faint hum of music behind me. I thought they were discussing something mundane, perhaps the leftovers or the next chore, but as they spoke, I noticed their voices drop into hushed tones, a soft cadence that immediately drew my attention. At first, I tried to focus on rinsing the dishes, but the sound of their laughter interlaced with whispers was impossible to ignore. Then I caught it, a fragment of a phrase, almost swallowed by the distance. "You're ours tonight." The words were playful, intimate, and carried a weight that made my chest tighten. My hands stilled on the counter as a sudden warmth spread through me, a mix of nervousness, curiosity, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. I dared to glance in their direction. Claire leaned slightly toward Lila, her profile softened by the warm glow of the kitchen light. Lila's eyes sparkled with mischief, and for a fleeting second, they both looked in my direction, though I wasn't sure if they noticed me watching. The way they shared that secretive moment, close enough for fingers to brush occasionally as they gestured, made the world shrink to just the three of us. It was impossible not to feel the magnetic pull. My pulse quickened, but it wasn't fear. It was a quiet thrill, the kind that comes from being drawn into something tender, intimate, and unspoken. I noticed the soft sway of Claire's hand as it rested lightly on the edge of the counter, the gentle brush of Lila's fingers against the fabric of her blouse as she leaned in to whisper. Each motion seemed charged with intent, subtle but impossible to dismiss. I tried to remind myself to breathe, to act normal, but the air felt thicker somehow, charged with something I hadn't anticipated. The faint scent of their perfume reached me, a mix of warmth and sweetness that made my senses feel sharper. Every sound, the quiet creak of the floor, the rustle of fabric, the soft cadence of their laughter, seemed amplified, weaving together into a tapestry of anticipation that made my heart race. Then Claire's gaze flicked toward me again, and I felt a shiver of awareness as her eyes met mine, holding them for a moment longer than necessary. Lila's smile broadened just slightly, teasing and reassuring at the same time, as if acknowledging that I had caught on. My stomach tightened in a delicious mixture of nerves and exhilaration, knowing that something unspoken had shifted. I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of the quiet, magnetic world they had created for this evening. I stepped back slightly, pretending to continue with the dishes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every glance, every whisper, was meant for me. Their words lingered in my mind, soft yet undeniably clear, echoing, "You're ours tonight." And in that moment, I realized I was exactly where I was meant to be, caught between curiosity, desire, and the warmth of two people who had already claimed a space in my heart. After the whispers, the air in the house felt charged in a way I couldn't quite name. I followed Claire and Lila back into the living room, where the warmth of the evening seemed to hug the space around us. The music had softened, leaving room for conversation, and for the first time, I noticed how attentive they were, not just in small gestures, but in the way they truly listened. Claire settled into the armchair near the window, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the gentle lines of her face. There was a quiet gravity in her eyes tonight, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. She began to tell a story, a memory from her past, tinged with both regret and hope. The way she spoke, her voice low and sincere, drew me in immediately. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting loosely on my knees, careful not to interrupt, but eager to be present. As she spoke, I became acutely aware of the small, intimate ways she anchored herself to me. Her fingers brushed against my hand when she emphasized a point. Her gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary, and when she laughed softly, it was as if she shared the moment with me alone, even though Lila was beside her. There was a delicate vulnerability in her movements, the slight slump of her shoulders, the gentle sway as she shifted in the chair, that made me feel protective, connected, and oddly privileged to witness. Lila, meanwhile, perched on the edge of the couch nearby, leaned in closer than usual, her hand brushing mine lightly as she handed me a pillow. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, but there was also warmth, a silent reassurance that I was welcome in this space, that my presence mattered more than I realized. The way she occasionally glanced at Claire, then back at me, created an unspoken rhythm, a gentle push and pull that left me both elated and slightly nervous. I noticed the texture of the room, the soft fabric of the armchairs under my fingers, the faint scent of vanilla and jasmine lingering in the air, the comforting hum of the lamp in the corner. Every sensory detail seemed magnified, each small touch or glance amplified in meaning. When Claire's hand brushed against mine again, this time intentionally, I felt a shiver of warmth radiate through my chest, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection forming between us. In that moment, I realized the depth of what was happening. This wasn't about flirtation or casual interaction. It was emotional intimacy, layered and slow-burning. I felt seen, understood, and quietly cherished by both women. Lila's light laughter and gentle nudges, Claire's earnest storytelling and fleeting touches, all of it pulled me into a space where hesitation mingled with desire, curiosity intertwined with comfort. By the time the story ended, I felt a sense of closeness I hadn't anticipated, a quiet bond forming that transcended age or circumstance. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders relax, savoring the warmth radiating from them both. Tonight was no longer just a casual visit. It was a night of emotional revelation, a first step into a connection that promised depth, tenderness, and the subtle thrill of being wanted in ways I had only just begun to understand. By the time the evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The earlier whispers, the shared glances, and the quiet stories had created a subtle, electric tension, almost like a current flowing just beneath the surface. Claire and Lila had an easy confidence tonight, their movements fluid and natural, yet charged in a way that left me unusually aware of every touch, every brush of their hands. We moved to the living room, deciding to watch an old movie together. Claire handed me a blanket as I sat down between them on the couch. The fabric was soft and warm, brushing against my legs as she tucked it around us, her fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. Lila leaned against the armrest beside me, her hand brushing lightly over mine when she reached for a bowl of popcorn. These touches, fleeting and seemingly casual, made my pulse quicken without me fully realizing it. The movie played, but I found myself paying far more attention to them than the screen. Claire shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing mine, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a comforting, grounding sensation that made me want to linger in the moment. Lila's laughter rang softly beside me, her cheek close enough that I could sense the subtle warmth of her presence. The playful teasing between the two of them, combined with the way they included me in their small jokes and glances, made the room feel intimate and alive. There was a quiet rhythm to their closeness, a deliberate yet gentle intimacy. Claire would lean in occasionally to comment on the movie, her hand brushing my arm as she gestured, and Lila would nudge me playfully when I reacted too seriously to a scene. Every interaction, every touch, felt deliberate but subtle, like a language only the three of us understood. I caught myself leaning slightly toward them, drawn by a mixture of curiosity, nervousness, and something warmer I didn't yet name. I also became painfully aware of my own hesitation. The age gap, the social expectations, and the uncertainty of how far this connection could go weighed on me. But those thoughts only made me more acutely aware of the emotional and physical closeness we shared. The warmth of their bodies near mine, the softness of the blanket we shared, the light scent of perfume and vanilla, all of it heightened the tension, making every glance and touch feel like an unspoken question. Even the mundane, a shared laugh, a popcorn kernel dropped and picked up together, a playful elbow nudge, carried weight. I realized that the night had shifted from ordinary to extraordinary, that each moment held layers of unspoken emotion. I felt simultaneously flustered and comfortable, nervous yet content, aware that the subtle intimacy we were sharing had become a kind of unspoken promise, one that was slowly unfolding in ways I was only beginning to understand. By the time the opening credits faded, I understood that this night was shaping me, pulling me into a world of warmth, playfulness, and quiet affection that I had never experienced before. Every brush of fingers, every shared smile, was a step deeper into a connection that promised tenderness, emotional intimacy, and the slow, steady pull of something more. The night had deepened, and the house seemed to settle around us like a protective cocoon. The earlier laughter and playful teasing had softened into a calm, tender rhythm. I found myself sitting closer to Claire and Lila on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of the blanket and their quiet presence. Every glance, every movement, felt intentional and significant, though nothing was said aloud. Claire leaned slightly toward me, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the blanket over my lap. The touch was casual, almost incidental, yet it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I felt the warmth radiating from her, a gentle steadiness that made my chest tighten with a strange mixture of comfort and anticipation. Lila mirrored her sister's subtle gestures, brushing her fingers lightly against mine as she reached for a cup of tea, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. The small touches, the quiet proximity, made me acutely aware of how alive the moment felt. We talked quietly, the conversation flowing effortlessly but with a depth I hadn't expected. Claire shared a memory of a long-forgotten dream, her voice soft and intimate, and I found myself listening not just with my ears, but with my entire being. Lila chimed in with her own story, playful yet honest, leaning closer as she spoke, the warmth of her shoulder brushing mine. Every word, every gesture, seemed to draw me further into a circle of trust and emotional intimacy I had never anticipated. The silence between words was as powerful as the conversation itself. I felt the quiet weight of their attention, the way they tuned into my reactions, the subtle shifts of their expressions as they gauged my responses. There was a kind of unspoken agreement that we were sharing something rare and precious, a closeness that transcended age, expectation, or social convention. Physical affection, though light, was constant. Claire's fingers occasionally brushed my hand, a soft reassurance that sent warmth radiating up my arm. Lila leaned against me, her shoulder resting lightly on mine, a playful smile tugging at her lips, yet carrying a tender sincerity. I felt caught between hesitation and desire, nervousness and an undeniable pull toward the quiet intimacy of their presence. Every touch seemed to say what words could not. We see you. We welcome you. We want you here. I realized, in that moment, that I was fully present in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. The warmth, the light touches, the shared laughter and silences, it all coalesced into a feeling of profound belonging. I was not just a visitor in their home. I was part of a shared space, an unspoken pact of care and attention that had been forming since I arrived. As the night drew on, I leaned back, letting my shoulders relax, my heart steadying in a way that felt both exhilarating and comforting. Claire's hand rested lightly against mine, Lila's shoulder pressed gently against me, and I felt the quiet affirmation of connection settle over us. This was the emotional peak, the moment where tension, playfulness, and intimacy converged into a perfect, steady warmth. I understood, with clarity, that tonight was ours, in a sense that went far beyond words or gestures. It was a night of trust, affection, and quiet, enduring connection, a night that would linger in memory long after the evening ended. The night had settled into a gentle quiet. The movie was over, the soft hum of the lamp filled the room, and the house seemed wrapped in a comforting stillness. I found myself sitting between Claire and Lila on the couch, their closeness enveloping me in warmth that was both physical and emotional. The earlier playful teasing and whispered words had evolved into a steady intimacy, calm, confident, and quietly affirming. Claire rested her hand lightly on my arm, her fingers brushing with the gentlest touch. I felt the warmth radiating through her palm, a steady, grounding presence that made my chest tighten with a mix of comfort and awe. Lila leaned against the other side, her shoulder pressing softly against mine, and I could feel the playful spark in her eyes even as she exhaled a relaxed, contented sigh. Together, they created a quiet circle of trust, attention, and subtle affection that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. The blanket we shared had become a cocoon around us, soft and warm, its weight grounding me in the moment. The faint scent of their perfume, mingled with the subtle aroma of the evening tea, created a sensory memory I knew would linger long after I left. Every brush of fingers, every fleeting touch, seemed deliberate yet effortless, a language of intimacy that required no words. Their presence was a tether, holding me gently while allowing me to sink into the moment completely. We talked quietly about small things, memories from the past, little dreams we hadn't shared before, and the conversation felt intimate not because of what was said, but because of the attention with which it was received. Claire's voice was soft but resonant, and Lila's laughter, low and playful, punctuated the pauses, making the room feel alive with warmth. I realized that this was the first time I had felt this fully accepted, this wholly included, by two people who, in different ways, had claimed a quiet, tender space in my heart. Physical affection remained subtle but constant. Claire's hand lingered lightly on mine as she laughed at a comment I made, and Lila rested her head near my shoulder while adjusting the blanket over us. Every touch carried a comforting weight, a reassurance of closeness that didn't demand anything more than presence. I realized that desire had been present all along, not just for attention or affection, but for the quiet intimacy of shared warmth, trust, and playful companionship. As the evening wound down, I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders relax into the space we had created together. I felt a gentle steadiness in my chest, a combination of elation and peace. Claire rested her head lightly against my shoulder for a brief moment, and Lila's hand rested softly over mine, playful and tender at the same time. I realized that tonight had been more than just a visit. It had been an affirmation of belonging, of connection, and of quiet love that transcended words. When I finally left, stepping into the cool night air, I carried with me the warmth of their presence. The evening had ended, but the subtle, unspoken promise of affection, trust, and emotional intimacy remained. I felt seen, wanted, and quietly cherished, knowing that our connection would continue to grow, slowly, naturally, and profoundly. Tonight had been ours, in every sense that truly mattered.